So I want to actually not start with policy and stuff, because I continue to think it's just the neatest story for a Republican member of Congress. You're a Marine, an ER doc, you were the student president of an HBCU without looking like you went to an HBCU typically, as most people think of, but you earned the trust of the student body. And then you're emergency room doctor in a highly diverse area of the state where you don't take for granted that you can just talk like your standard Republican on the stump speech. It's always an encouraging, optimistic, really nonpartisan message that has drawn in a pretty diverse base of voters for you.
You know, I'm glad you bring this up, because one of the things that we're kind of missing in politics right now is there's a lot of people who get on their phone or get on the internet right now, and they're trying to win an argument. They're trying to convince somebody that they're wrong and that I'm right. One of the things that we've forgotten is that when you get on the internet, the other person on the internet didn't get on there to prove that they're an idiot. They didn't want to know that they're wrong. They don't go into a conversation hoping that you'll prove that they don't know what they're talking about. If you really want to be influential, if you want to win over minorities, youth, soccer moms, if you want to change the constitution of our party and grow it back to the days where Reagan won 49 out of 50 states, won by 12.5%, if you want to have that kind of conversation, instead of trying to win an argument, try to win a friend. That's the way you develop real influence in this world.
You've practiced what you've preached in that. I mean, let me just pause for a moment before we get into Congress and why on earth you'd even do that. But an emergency room doctor in Gwinnett County, you've seen some like pretty terrible things in the emergency room and had to console people, even though as a doctor in the emergency room. And you saw COVID hit and what happened in hospitals across America there, in your own hospital. I mean, you're dealing with humanity when you're in the ER, when you were in the ER on a regular basis.
You know, there are certain things that are universal to all people. Everybody wants opportunity. Everybody wants to be recognized as a person. When you go into a room, if you want to win over a patient, the doctors get sued aren't the doctors who are dumb. They're not the doctors who don't know what they're doing. It's the doctors who don't treat people well. And this goes back to my original point. You witness a lot of bad things, but if you want to have the ability to absorb it and feel good about what you do, because you'll see children die. You'll see people rotting with cancer. You'll see people who are having the worst day of their life. The question is, how do you handle that, and what kind of impact you can have? It is a ministry. And this is one of the things I love about Erick, is that if you listen to Erick on the radio, it's his ministry. It's his ability to affect people and the way they think of things, and the things he say are authentic and moral. And I think that's missing in politics a lot of times right now. In a conversation in the ER, the way I survive the horrible things you see is if you have a relationship, you feel like actually people are changing their behavior and their attitudes, even towards death, which is inevitable for every one of my patients and every one of us. We're all going to die someday. The question is, how do we face down that death? How do we make our impact on life? And that's kind of what keeps you going, even in the face of seeing some pretty horrible things sometimes.
Speaking of horrible things, you decided to run for Congress. I mean, you know what I think about you, and it's a guy of your caliber and character. I'm glad you're in Washington, but at the same time, why put yourself and your family through that? And by the way, first term too. So
yes. So when I was it's always been nice to be an ER doc. People respect that. It was great being a Marine. People like that. Being in youth ministry for about 20 years, people liked me. And then I went into politics. It's not just that the Democrats don't like you. Half of your party, once you get into a primary, you've seen how it's kind of become really backbiting and divisive, where a lot of people inside the party believe that if you don't agree with what I think, then you're not really a Republican. You're either a rhino or a crazy. We start throwing names around in our own party as if we're a cult, as if everybody has to believe exactly the same thing. It's not a good way to grow the party, by the way. And I'm ultra-conservative. For those who aren't paying attention right now, I'm probably one of the 30 most conservative people when it comes to votes in all of Congress. But I don't go around calling people names. And even though I've had this diverse background of experiences, I think it's prepared me for this moment in time to try to convince people to do the right thing, even inside of my own party. When I see people that disagree with me, if I approach it with, have you considered, I might have a good result, but if I approach with "you're an idiot," once again, it doesn't help me with the conversation. And I think you're seeing us achieve some things with a very narrow majority, only 4-vote majority essentially, that we didn't achieve when we had a 20-vote majority. Because of the relationships that we're seating right now, because everybody's at the table. You had Chip here recently. Chip's a firebrand. Chip's a devout conservative. Nobody would doubt that. But to watch him bring him into the fold and help with the decision making, even with people that maybe you don't support as a speaker, but watching everybody contribute and actually have their input so that when we come up with legislation, it's way more conservative than if it's just ramrodded through with some sort of omnibus bill. I think that's the rewarding thing for me, despite having the disadvantage of actually being part of the political machine now.
Well, you know, you mentioned that it actually is notable because of such a small majority, the coalition building that has to go into the legislation. In the past, you could see leadership design the package. It never even went through the committee process. It was sent to the floor at the last minute, and they knew that they had a coalition that would never object to it. And now with a 4-seat majority, you've got to have a level of buy-in to be able to advance the agenda, and you are having to balance out the Don Bacons of Nebraska, the Chip Roys of Texas, the Rich McCormicks of Georgia to build something that's acceptable to all but maybe 2 or 3 people.
The way we're getting it done, first of all, going through committees for the first time in a long time. We're actually going through everything, even the appropriations process now. And the reason it's getting passed is because when we're having our conference get together and somebody stands up and says, "Look, I understand this is not exactly what you want or what you want, but if we don't pass this, if we don't have some source of urgency, the Senate will put something in and we'll get a worse bill that we have to vote on." The point of getting as much conservative of the process done with the idea that we support instead of they support, in other words, with some sort of sanity, with some sort of fiscal constraints, understanding what the people want and what's good for America. If we act on that, even if it's not perfect, it's an incremental change in the right direction, which is, by the way our government was designed. So many times we swing for the fences, we get 0. Get something. Democrats are great at this, getting small little changes, and next thing you know, we're way over to the left, but they did it one bite at a time. You don't eat an elephant all one time. If we're going to have the way the design of our government is to have incremental change, to have an inefficient government that doesn't change things very quickly. That's on purpose so it doesn't become too powerful. What both sides need to be careful of is we don't use the government as a weapon, that we don't use it as a way to get my way and cram it down your throat, even when it doesn't agree with maybe an individual. We are based on the ultimate minority here in America, which is the individual. And that's what we're trying to protect. And I think by getting that incremental change in small bites towards something as conservative as possible, we can get this done.
I want to talk to you a little bit about military preparedness. The number one issue when I ask people questions for those of you who are going to be on stage, was the military. You are a Marine. I always catch myself, not was, are, always present tense for Marines. And you are seeing, just by virtue of what the hearings in Congress, a lot of things that are happening in the military right now, some of which just seem insane, like cultural stuff in the military, trying to advance a social agenda in America by first advancing in the military, but also serious procurement process issues, technology issues, weapons development issues, that it's like the bureaucracy's gotten too unwieldy now.
You know, it's funny, most of the contentiousness we had in the NDAA and the approval process was over the political side of the military, which should have never been an issue to begin with. You never make the military a political experiment. We are warriors. I always say, when you want to know what the mission of the Marine Corps is, every Marine can tell you to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy through fire and maneuver, or to repel the enemy's assault through fire and close combat. That is our mission. Anything outside of it is a distraction. That includes our weapon procurement, or the policies, the lectures we have to get. In my last year in the Navy, it's hard to say Navy, but you don't think my friends give me a hard time, man. But when I was on a Marine Corps base, and we had 4 lectureships on how to treat transgenders in the military. We didn't even have transgenders in the military at the time. This is when Trump was president, by the way. I saw it as a huge distraction now that we allow transgenders in the military. To give you an example, if you come in, and it's not that I really care, if you're an adult and you want to do something I think is deranged or whatever, and I'm not saying that transgenderism is deranged, but I think it is a somatic disorder by a medical standard that I've studied, And I feel sorry for people who have that problem because you have a 40% chance of trying to commit suicide. That's a significant problem. Why would you bring somebody with that mentality? And by the way, that's regardless if you feel persecuted or not. This was done by a UCLA study, very even-handed. It didn't have a bias towards conservatism. It's just a fact. You're going to struggle with some significant problems mentally. Why would you we won't bring people in with flat feet, but you'll bring people in, think about that. We're very selective. We discriminate all the time when it comes to military. But you cannot come in the military if you have flat feet or you have to take certain medications for psychiatry or any other medical condition. But you're going to bring somebody in who literally could have a surgery and hormonal treatment and counseling that's going to keep you from deploying or shooting bad guys or doing anything of consequence. So therefore, your budget, which we know we have a budget problem already, is going to be spent on those people, the most expensive demographic. Meanwhile, they can't deploy, so your sons and daughters are going to have to deploy in their place. How does that make sense? We're losing the sense and sensibility of what the military is all about. And by the way, it's been the greatest place for integration, for brotherhood and sisterhood that's ever existed in America. It's the ultimate meritocracy. It's the one good thing we have in America left. Let's keep it what it is, a mission-centered group of men and women.
Just so everybody knows here, your committee assignments, because you're not on armed services, are you?
I am.
You are? Okay. Which ones are you on?
So I'm on more committees and subcommittees than anybody in Congress right now.
This is why I had to ask, because I can't name them all.
So on armed services with the subcommittees of tactical air and land, as well as cybersecurity. I'm also on foreign affairs with subcommittees of North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, as well as global health. Also on science, space, and technologies with a subcommittee in aerospace and space. And also on the special committee for coronavirus, is the only doctor who's actually treated coronavirus in Congress, as well as the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So we go meet with other parliamentarians and come up with NATO policy, which for the first time in world history, NATO really has a mission that it's going after and accomplishing, hopefully.
You are aware you're married to a nerd, right? Yes. I mean, this is why I got to ask. So, but in that regard, it balances so many wheelhouses between cybersecurity, what's happening. I've talked to a number of the candidates on stage about all the weird coups that are starting to happen in West Africa. You've got the China situation and its expanse. I mean, obviously there's lots of stuff that you can't tell the crowd. But
I could tell them I just have to kill them. It's a big crowd.
You former job there, so now, but in all seriousness, you're seeing behind the scenes problems on the horizon. I mean, what do you want Americans to know about it? Is the government prepared to deal with some of these problems? And if not, are we thinking about how we need to move the ship of state?
Yeah, this is where I get really concerned. First of all, that we get the words globalism confused with world leader. So I'm not a globalist. I don't believe that any country should be on even footing with America because we are leaders. But to be leaders, we have to be involved with the world. We can't be isolationists. This is one of the problems I find with the rhetoric from my own party right now. There are people out there that believe we shouldn't support any other country. We shouldn't be involved in any other country. That we shouldn't allow any immigrants into America for a couple years. Maybe some of you believe that. It's okay to have that conversation. I'm not saying that you're a lesser human being, but I want you to consider that America has a real leadership role in the world. People pay attention to us. We just got back from Bangladesh and India yesterday in the afternoon, and it was a phenomenal trip to understand how people perceive us. And the strategic importance of India, by the way, cannot be overstated. If you take the populations of India and China alone, you combine that together, it's 3 billion people, almost 3 billion people. That used to be what the world population was when I was growing up. That's just two nations. When you look at what China's doing around the world, what they're using to warp the economy of the world, the way they're using slave labor and fiat currency, the way that they're deploying the military all around the world. They just bought basically and paid for a port in Bangladesh that can be used for submarines. Now, Bangladesh has one submarine in their entire Navy. It was given to them by China basically, and it can't even go underwater. So get an idea what that submarine base is going to be used for. Is going to be a Chinese port. All over Africa, all over the West. You want to get scared, think about what China's doing in the Western Hemisphere, in Argentina, Chile, now Colombia, now Brazil, Venezuela, what it's doing in Cuba, what it's doing now in Central America. Be very aware that if we're not world leaders, if we're not invested in the rest of the world, we lose our prominence. As soon as you lose our prominence, somebody's going to take that spot, and China is waiting, salivating for that opportunity. And I'm very concerned. If you look at the way Russia's had its influence, it has an economy the size of just Texas. And yet it has some world influence, allies through the perceived strength of the military, and that gets back to our military preparedness. If you don't represent strength around the world economically and militarily, somebody else will. And we have to be world leaders. That doesn't mean globalists, but we have to lead the world, and we have to show them that we care enough to actually help them with their own self-determination. That's why it's important to have really strong allies too.
I didn't realize you just got back from India and Bangladesh, so thank you again for being here today. How's the jet lag?
You know, I'm kind of used to traveling now, and it's a lot better to travel in first class than it is to travel on the belly of a ship for 6 months, which I've done several times. So I'll take that any day. No, we were treated well.
Good. Okay, so let's talk about India and Bangladesh a little more, because we do have this Indian subcontinent with 1 billion people who, they're a democracy. It's fractious and messy like democracy sometimes can be. And I've had this idea now for a while, and I know you and I have talked about it briefly, of it, instead of outsourcing, ally sourcing, that it seems like we should be moving heaven and earth to help our companies do business in allies like India, where we can still manufacture things cheaply enough that it doesn't affect our way of life, as opposed to just sending everything to China. And the Biden administration seems more intent on spending money on battery-powered cars for farmers in America than helping us divest from China.
Worrisome policies. I'm glad you brought up the Biden policy, which whenever you're talking about renewable policies, it sounds great on paper. But the problem is that most of that technology and that production is over in China, up to 90% in certain areas. When you talk about renewable energies and putting them in the hands of China, which seems very hypocritical since they are the world's greatest polluters. Even the way they produce their renewable technologies is producing a ton of pollutants to the world. So the more we hand over the keys to energy production in America to a foreign national country that literally gets enriched by it and continues to pollute by it, it's not achieving what Biden says he wants to achieve, first of all. And secondly, it's making them into an economic power that will surpass America eventually if we keep it up. They've grown from a GDP of about $5 trillion back in 2015 when they came out with their Made in China initiative in the World Trade Organization, to now a $13.8 trillion GDP, catching up to us rapidly, passing China and Germany. They are problematic because they are not doing what we want them to do. By joining the World Trade Organization, we thought we could make them more into partners. They've done anything but that. They've used, like I said, slave labor all over the world, including the western part of China. They continue to use their own debt to warp the market by propping up certain businesses in China to outperform American producers and put them out of business, like producing certain drugs and PPE and technologies, and it's going to warp the market. So I think the more we hand things over to Biden and his policy that's favorable to China, the worse we're going to do as a nation, and the more we're going to pollute anyway. So it's not good policy.
Being in the majority, but also a young member of Congress, I mean, what interactions do you have, if at all, with people from the Biden administration?
None from the Biden administration directly. Although I will say Catherine Tai, who's into trade, she's very intelligent. She impresses me as the one person I've been briefed with when we were in the Munich Security Council. If you read her stuff, it's very apolitical, and it's very much pointing out the misbehavior of China. But other than her, I mean, most of them are political hacks, quite frankly. So I don't try to focus on people I know. It's like wasting your pearls on swine, so to speak, for any of us who want to make a biblical reference.
So before we wrap up, let me just talk to you about the minutia of being a member of Congress, having a cell phone, All right. Sorry. Being a member of Congress and just dealing with constituents. So you represent the 6th District of Georgia, and it's a fairly compact district because it's suburban Metro Atlanta. But just what's it like to actually the day-to-day operations of being a member of Congress, not in hearings in Washington, D.C., but just dealing with constituents?
This is the part that I actually love a lot about, maybe the most about Congress. We have the 6th District, which for those of you who don't know is North Fulton area all the way up to Dawson. And it kind of brackets over on the East Cobb area all the way to Sugar Hill. And it's super diverse because it starts with very suburban to very rural, 40% minorities. But I think that God has very much prepared us for this moment. And by the way, this is the one thing we control, is constituent services. Everything else, I'm 1 out of 435 votes. Constituent services, every single person who calls my district gets help. I don't ask if they're a Democrat or Republican. That's how you win friends. We've been extremely effective. I think we have I'm biased, we have the best staff in the world when it comes to this. I literally call 10 people a week just to see how did we do. And we're getting rave reviews. So I love the fact we're one of the most highly educated districts in all of Georgia. Most degrees and just affluence, and to watch their education level in their decision making, how it transcends politics and really gets into the meat of the matter. They're well educated. They understand the policy and how it's going to affect us into the future. And I've really enjoyed the interaction with people who represent what I've been prepared for. If you don't believe in God, imagine this: a Marine who's never had any background in politics, who never went to a political meeting in his life, who never knew a politician, who never did a fundraiser or contributed to anybody other than Herman Cain, which was $50 in medical school. That's about all I had. But literally just was not really into politics to all of a sudden come out of nowhere and beat my state senator, and then beat another candidate who was not only endorsed by Trump, but also by Gingrich and Pompeo and Sean Hannity and all these other people. Why did that happen? Well, look at my history and how God's prepared me. We have 40,000 Koreans, 100,000 African Americans, 100,000 Indians. We have this incredibly diverse district, and I spent 3 tours in Korea. I've spent a tour in India. 1 out of every 5 doctors in my community is from India. And I was a student body president at Morehouse School of Medicine. Tell me there's not a God.
Amen. It's the nature of the beast because you're in the House of Representatives and it's in the Constitution, but does it get a little tiring that it almost seems like it's a perpetual campaign being in a 2-year cycle? I
don't look at it that way. I don't worry. It sounds weird for a politician to
Yeah, okay, let me just stop. The man doesn't worry, and it's the worst trait that he has. He's the most optimistic person I know.
You know, I'm fairly stoic when it comes to my approach to everything because I believe that God is ultimately in control, you know, and even when we get a president we don't like, it's going to work out. It's been prophesied. I know this. I will say that I am enjoying thoroughly the learning process. You have more access to more information than anybody other than the President of the United States. The rich relationships between meeting folks like you, which I thoroughly enjoy, to meeting heads of state, to see the diverse political input from countries, Bangladesh and India, 2 very separate, to talk to the Prime Minister of India and the President of Israel the same day. I mean, who gets to do that? I mean, to talk a 4-star general as a peer is phenomenal. I have breakfast with the future Commandant of the Marine Corps and the current Commandant of the Marine Corps at the same time is an opportunity I'm forever grateful for my constituency putting me in, because I think that it gives me the right input. If you want to grow, and a lot of politicians don't use this as an opportunity to learn. My wife knows, she knows I stay up late at night reading and learning because this is like medical school and flight school combined, rolled into one. And my wife, she's always been, I always say, she's always been summa cum laude. I've always been thank the good laude. And, you know, the average person takes about 7 times the repetition to learn something. Doctors are expected to learn it in 3. I learn it in about 12. So I spend a lot of time learning, but I'm reading constantly, and I'm enjoying this process immensely because I feel like I'm becoming more complete. And so I can have a conversation with people inside of my party I disagree with from a logical, factual standpoint rather than just emotional. And I think the emotion is what gets into trouble in politics a lot of times.
Congressman, friend of mine, Rich McCormick, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for doing this. I would have never asked, but I know you were doing that travel, so thank you. Absolutely. Thanks.